1,000 Miles Up the Nile, Section 6. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. 1,000 Miles Up the Nile by Amelia B. Edwards. Chapter 2, Cairo and the Mecca Pilgrimage, Part 3. Softly at first, and one by one, the dervishes took up the chant, Allah, Allah, Allah. Their heads and their voices rose and fell in unison. The dome above gave back a hollow echo. There was something strange and solemn in the ceremony. Presently, however, the trumpets brayed louder, the voices grew hoarser, the heads bowed lower, the name of Allah rang out faster and faster, fiercer and fiercer. The leader, himself cool and collected, began sensibly accelerating the time of the chorus, and it became evident that the performers were possessed by a growing frenzy. Soon the whole circle was madly rocking to and fro, the voices rose to a hoarse scream, and only the trumpets were audible above the din. Now and then a dervish would spring up convulsively some 3 or 4 feet above the heads of the others, but for the most part they stood firmly rooted to one spot, now bowing their heads almost to their feet, now flinging themselves so violently back that we, standing behind, could see their faces foreshortened upside down, and this with such incredible rapidity that their long hair had scarcely time either to rise or fall, but remained as if suspended in mid-air. Still the frenzy mounted, still the pace quickened. Some shrieked, some groaned, some, unable to support themselves any longer, were held up in their places by the bystanders. All were mad for the time being. Our own heads seemed to be going round at last, and more than one of the ladies present looked longingly towards the door. It was, in truth, a horrible sight, and needed only darkness and torchlight to be quite diabolical. At length, just as the fury was at its height, and the very building seemed to be rocking to and fro above our heads, one poor wretch staggered out of the circle and fell writhing and shrieking close against our feet. At the same moment the leader clapped his hands, the performers, panting and exhausted, dropped into a sitting posture, and the first zikr, as it is called, came abruptly to an end. Some few, however, could not stop immediately, but kept on swaying and muttering to themselves, while the one in the fit, having ceased to shriek, lay stiff and straight, apparently in a state of coma. There was a murmur of relief and a simultaneous rising among the spectators. It was announced that another zikr, with the reinforcement of fresh dervishes, would begin soon, but the Europeans had had enough of it, and few remained for the second performance. Going out, we paused beside the poor fellow on the floor and asked if nothing could be done for him. "He is struck by Mohammed," said gravely an Egyptian official who was standing by. At that moment the leader came over, knelt down beside him, touched him lightly on the head and breast, and whispered something in his ear. The man was then quite rigid, and white as death. We waited, however, and after a few more minutes saw him struggle back into a dazed, half-conscious state, when he was helped to his feet and led away by his friends. The courtyard, as we came out, was full of dervishes sitting on cane benches in the shade and sipping coffee. The green leaves rustled overhead, with glimpses of intensely blue sky between, and brilliant patches of sunshine flickered down upon groups of wild-looking, half-savage figures in party-colored garments. It was one of those ready-made subjects that the sketcher passes by with a sigh, but which live in his memory forever. From hence, being within a few minutes' drive of old Cairo, we went on as far as the Mosque of Amr, an uninteresting ruin standing alone among the rubbish mounds of the first Mohammedan capital of Egypt. It is constructed on the plan of a single quadrangle 225 feet square, surrounded by a covered colonnade, one range of pillars in depth on the west, which is the site of the entrance, 4 on the north, 3 on the south, and 6 on the east, which is the place of prayer, and contains 3 holy niches and the pulpit. The columns, 245 in number, have been brought from earlier Roman and Byzantine buildings. They are of various marbles, and have all kinds of capitals. Some, being originally too short, have been stilted on disproportionately high bases, and in one instance the necessary height has been obtained by adding a second capital on the top of the first. We observed one column of that rare black and white speckled marble of which there is a specimen in the pulpit of St. Mark's in Venice, and one of the holy niches contains some fragments of Byzantine mosaics. But the whole building seems to have been put together in a barbarous way, and would appear to owe its present state of dilapidation more to bad workmanship than to time. Many of the pillars, especially on the western side, are fallen and broken. The octagonal fountain in the centre is a roofless ruin, and the little minaret at the southeast corner is no longer safe. Apart, however, from its poverty of design and detail, the Mosque of Amr is interesting as a point of departure in the history of Saracenic architecture. It was built by Amr ibn al-As, the Arab conqueror of Egypt, in the 21st year of the Hegira, A.D. 642, just 10 years after the death of Muhammad, and it is the earliest Saracenic edifice in Egypt. We were glad, therefore, to have seen it for this reason, if for no other. But it is a barren, dreary place, and the glare reflected from all sides of the quadrangle was so intense that we were thankful to get away again into the narrow streets beside the river. Here we presently fell in with a wedding procession, consisting of a crowd of men, a band, and some 3 or 4 hired carriages full of veiled women, one of whom was pointed out as the bride. The bridegroom walked in the midst of the men, who seemed to be teasing him, drumming round him, and opposing his progress, while high above the laughter, the shouting, the jingle of tambourines, and the drumming of darabukas, was heard the shrill squeal of some instrument that sounded exactly like a bagpipe. It was a brilliant afternoon, and we ended our day's work, I remember, with a drive on the Shubra road, and a glance at the gardens of the Khedive's summer palace. The Shubra road is the Champs-Élysées of Cairo, and is thronged every day from 4 to half past 6. Here little sheds of roadside cafes alternate with smart modern villas. Ragged fellaheen on jaded donkeys trot side by side with elegant attachés on high-stepping Arabs, while tourists in hired carriages, Jew bankers in unexceptionable phaetons, veiled harems in London-built broughams, Italian shopkeepers in preposterously fashionable toilettes, grave sheikhs on magnificent Cairo asses, officers in frogged and braided frocks, and English girls in tall hats and close-fitting habits, followed by the inevitable little solemn-looking English groom, pass and repass, proceed and follow each other, in one changing, restless, heterogeneous stream, the like of which is to be seen in no other capital in the world. The sons of the Khedive drive here daily, always in separate carriages and preceded by 4 saises and 4 guards. They are of all ages and sizes, from the hereditary prince, a pale, gentlemanly-looking young man of 4 or 5 and 20, down to one tiny, imperious atom of about 6, who is dressed like a little man, and is constantly leaning out of his carriage window and shrilly abusing his coachman. Apart, however, from those who frequent it, the Shubra road is really a fine drive, broad, level, raised some 6 or 8 feet above the cultivated plain, closely planted on both sides with acacias and sycamore fig trees, and reaching straight away for 4 miles out of Cairo, counting from the railway terminus to the summer palace. The carriage-way is about as wide as the road across Hyde Park, which connects Bayswater with Kensington, and towards the Shubra end it runs closely beside the Nile. Many of the sycamores are of great size and quite patriarchal girth. Their branches meet overhead nearly all the way, weaving a delicious shade and making a cool tunnel of the long perspective. We did not stay long in the Khedive's gardens, for it was already getting late when we reached the gates, but we went far enough to see that they were tolerably well kept, not over-formal, and laid out with a view to masses of foliage, shady paths, and spaces of turf inlaid with flower-beds, after the style of the famous Sarthim and Moser gardens at Botzen in the Tyrol. Here are sant trees, acacia nilotica, of unusual size, powdered all over with little feathery tufts of yellow blossom, orange and lemon trees in abundance, heaps of little green limes, bananas bearing heavy pendant bunches of ripe fruit, winding thickets of pomegranates, oleanders, and salvias, and great beds and banks and trellised walks of roses. Among these, however, I observed none of the rarer varieties. As for the poinsettia, it grows in Egypt to a height of 20 feet, and bears blossoms of such size and color as we in England can form no idea of. We saw large trees of it both here and at Alexandria that seemed as if bending beneath a mantle of crimson stars, some of which cannot have measured less than 22 inches in diameter. A large Italian fountain in a rococo style is the great sight of the place. We caught a glimpse of it through the trees, and surprised the gardener who was showing us over by declining to inspect it more nearly. He could not understand why we preferred to give our time to the shrubs and flower beds. Driving back presently towards Cairo with a big handful of roses apiece, we saw the sun going down in an aureole of fleecy pink and golden clouds, the Nile flowing by like a stream of liquid light, and a little fleet of sailing boats going up to Boulak before a puff of north wind that had sprung up as the sun neared the horizon. That puff of north wind, those gliding sails, had a keen interest for us now, and touched us nearly, because I have delayed this momentous revelation till the last moment, because we were to start tomorrow. And this is why I have been able, in the midst of so much that was new and bewildering, to remember quite circumstantially the dates, and all the events connected with these last 2 days. They were to be our last 2 days in Cairo, and tomorrow morning, Saturday the 13th of December, we were to go on board a certain dahabeah now lying off the iron bridge at Boulak, therein to begin that strange aquatic life to which we had been looking forward with so many hopes and fears, and towards which we had been steering through so many preliminary difficulties. But the difficulties were now all over, and everything was settled, though not in the way we had at first intended. For in place of a small boat we had secured one of the largest on the river, and instead of going alone we had decided to throw our lot in with that of 3 other travellers. One of these 3 was already known to the writer. The other 2, friends of the first, were on their way out from Europe, and were not expected in Cairo for another week. We knew nothing of them but their names. Meanwhile L. and the writer, assuming sole possession of the dahabeah, were about to start 10 days in advance, it being their intention to push on as far as Rhoda, the ultimate point then reached by the Nile railway, and there to await the arrival of the rest of the party. Now Rhoda, more correctly Rhoda, is just 180 miles south of Cairo, and we calculated upon seeing the Saqqara pyramids, the Tura quarries, the tombs of Beni Hassan, and the famous grotto of the Colossus on the sledge, before our fellow travellers should be due. "It depends on the wind, you know," said our dragoman, with a lugubrious smile. We knew that it depended on the wind, but what then? In Egypt the wind is supposed always to blow from the north at this time of the year, and we had a good 10 days at our disposal. The observation was clearly irrelevant. End of Section 6.